Ukrainian soldiers continue to employ all available resources to defend their territory against enemy forces. The 137th Separate Territorial Defense Battalion adapted a civilian vehicle to function as a missile launcher. The improvised system was successfully used to engage enemy targets. This has become a symbol of the Ukrainian military's determination to counter Russian forces. While a standard rocket launcher system costs millions of dollars, these troops are achieving significant results using improvised, low-cost solutions, successfully targeting enemy vehicles valued at millions. The Ukrainian army is successfully destroying enemy targets in the most effective and fastest way using FPV kamikaze drones. With financial support from the public, the Ukrainian army is inflicting more damage on enemy targets every day. Drone operators are successfully entering enemy hangars and shelters with precision. South of the village of Bahesha in the Donetsk region, 2 Russian soldiers traveling at high speed on a motorcycle struck a remotely planted mine. One of the soldiers was injured and fled into a wooded area. FPV drones from the 33rd Mechanized Brigade were deployed to track him. The drone strike resulted in the soldier being neutralized. Ukraine's 414th Hungarian Birds UAV Brigade identified a Russian soldier attempting to move across Ukrainian positions in the Zaporizhia region. An FPV drone was immediately deployed in response. Upon noticing the drone, the Russian soldier attempted to engage it, but the response came too late. Ukrainian forces had cornered a Russian soldier with an FPV kamikaze drone. The soldier, in a state of panic, drew his weapon and fired at the approaching drone. However, his attempts were ineffective, and once he ran out of ammunition, his options were exhausted. The Ukrainian drone operator chose to give his enemy one more chance. Perhaps he would surrender. But the Russian soldier did not understand the message. Instead of taking the second chance, he reloaded his weapon and pulled the trigger again. The kamikaze drone was no longer hesitant. Target locked. And the violent explosion that followed buried this stubbornness in the darkness of history. Russian soldiers carrying a wounded comrade to a vehicle came under attack by Ukrainian forces. An FPV kamikaze drone engaged the group. The Russian soldiers attempted to shoot down the incoming drone but were unsuccessful. The drone then targeted the vehicle directly, and the exposure in open terrain resulted in significant losses for the Russian forces. The Ukrainian army launched an intensive operation to clear enemy targets in the Kursk region. Troops repelled the enemy with FPV kamikaze drones. In the second phase, Ukrainian infantry moved in. Foot soldiers advanced toward the enemy's shelters. Infantry placed explosives in the enemy shelter. Shortly thereafter, a massive explosion occurred in the enemy shelter. Troops began neutralizing enemy positions by throwing grenades at them. Ukrainian soldiers did not even allow the enemy to exit the shelters. The infantry placed explosives in each of the shelters one by one. The explosives destroyed the enemy shelters. The purpose of bombing the shelters in this operation was to completely destroy any enemy infantry inside. Ukrainian forces had already conducted a concentrated assault on the area using artillery units and FPV kamikaze drones. The infantry was executing the final phase of the operation, focusing on securing and clearing remaining enemy positions. With the arrival of summer, the Russian army attempts to infiltrate Ukrainian front lines with infantry on foot, taking advantage of the dense green grass that covers the land during these months. Enemy soldiers try to use the seasonal cover as camouflage. Here is one such moment: a Russian infantryman attempts to crawl and hide in the tall grass. If you don't look carefully, it cannot be seen. However, the enemy infantry cannot escape the attention of drone pilots. Ukrainian units quickly spot the soldier, and an FPV kamikaze drone is immediately sent toward him. After a precise and fierce strike, the enemy infantryman is completely neutralized. In the Serebryansky forest, Russian soldiers used camouflaged clothing in an attempt to conceal themselves from Ukrainian reconnaissance drones. This was to avoid thermal cameras. But there was something else they didn't realize. Wearing these clothes during daylight actually made them more visible. Ukrainian reconnaissance drones quickly detected the enemy soldiers. The Ukrainian Army Steel Lions unit was immediately mobilized to engage the identified forces. The initial artillery fire had commenced. When combined with FPV kamikaze drone strikes, it created an overwhelming situation for the Russian forces. In the village of Univka in the Sumy region, 2 Russian soldiers entered a civilian area without authorization and moved toward a local resident's garden. At that time, Ukrainian Armed Forces aerial reconnaissance units stationed nearby were actively monitoring the surroundings using drones. Shortly after entering the garden, the Russian soldiers initiated hostile activity. They took positions around the house and were assessed as preparing to engage from within the civilian area. However, this movement was being monitored in real time. Given the urgency of the situation, Ukrainian forces immediately relayed the coordinates to FPV, first-person view, loitering drone operators. Targeting commenced. As soon as the sound of the first FPV drone was detected, the Russian soldiers appeared to panic. They attempted to conceal themselves in the garden but were forced to withdraw shortly thereafter. They abandoned the area due to the effects of the detonation. The Russian army advanced on Ukrainian positions with a BMP armored vehicle and a tank. Ukrainian troops quickly identified the vehicles using reconnaissance drones. FPV kamikaze drones were dispatched along the enemy's route. The first strike targeted the BMP armored personnel carrier, and the drone successfully hit the vehicle, rendering it immobile. The enemy infantry was forced to disembark from the damaged vehicle. The leading Russian tank withdrew from the area upon recognizing the threat, but Ukrainian troops were determined not to allow the enemy tank to escape. An FPV kamikaze drone immediately pursued the vehicle. The drone operator targeted the vehicle's tracks to immobilize it, but it continued to advance. A second kamikaze drone then struck, this time hitting the upper section of the armored vehicle. Russian forces had reinforced the tank with additional armor, but Ukrainian troops remained determined to neutralize it. The responsibility for disabling the tank, which had withstood the kamikaze drone strikes, was transferred to artillery units. Artillery fire targeted the area where the enemy vehicle was maneuvering. The artillery hit the enemy vehicle with pinpoint accuracy. The tank's turret was obliterated in a massive explosion. The site where the armored vehicle was destroyed served as a stark message, positioned alongside previously neutralized enemy vehicles.